What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Spot Burn Podcast, episode number 6. You have your two co-hosts, Dan
and Bam Bam,
back in the dungeon today. We also, against his will, kept our last guest trapped in the dungeon. It's been a little bit over a week. He hasn't eaten. He hasn't really slept. It's been cold and wet down here. So bear with us. He's going to get to see some sunshine and get some lunch after we record this podcast. But Red Bear, you're back out of hibernation.
back again.
Back again, baby.
Looking forward to seeing the daylight.
Yeah, and we got him here. We're gonna be diving into maybe one of the more controversial topics in musky fishing right now. Least understood piece of equipment, but we're talking about Livescope today. We're gonna go into it, and is it ruining fishing? Is it more voodoo? Is it catching all the fish? We'll have to find out. We'll see. But first, let's do a sponsor plug.
Yeah, we'd like to give a big shout out to our sponsors, Stealthcraft Boats out of Baldwin, Michigan. They're home of the finest boats on the market. Go check them out. Give them some love. If you're in the market for a raft or a sup or a freaking rad jet boat, they got everything you need. And then also Cortland Line Company, making some of the best fly lines on the market. Everything from salt water to warm water, cold water stuff. Check them out. They got everything you need.
Thanks for sponsoring, guys. We love it. A little current events. We don't have much today, but by the time this drops, it is almost going to be musky season. It'll be so close we can taste it. The madness will get started for another season, and we're pretty excited. If you are looking to get dialed in, though, you got questions, your first musky adventure, your first musky season, your 10th, your 20th, you want to take it to the next level, feel free to give us a call at the shop, send us an email, reach out. We are here to help. We got a crew of pure Musky Fools, and we really, really enjoy talking to all y'all. But we got a long one today. We're going to dive 2 feet in. We are talking about Livescope, the main event. The main event, does it belong in fishing? Is it ruining fishing? Is this some new incredible technology that catches everything? We asked Jake to come back on because, he was literally driving around with radio telemetry wands on airplanes, and it was pretty hard to find the muskies. So we imagine there's some crossover when it comes to Livescope. But yeah, I guess a little context just to get us started. If you musky fly fish, if you musky fish at all, troll, throw gear, and you've been living in a 20-foot hole for the last few years and have no idea what we're talking about, why there's been all this drama, grown men crying and whining. It almost shut down the PMTT last year. Was really all about Livescope. Some people kind of poke fun at it. Others are getting judged for using it. There's no scope hashtags. What is all the fuss about? Well, rest assured, we got good old Bam Bam, myself, and Jake. We're going to spot burn the heck out of it. We're going to try and get to the bottom of it and see if Livescope will be in all of our boats by the end of the season. Another point of context probably to share is we have 3 fly anglers, card-carrying musky fly anglers here. Historically in fly fishing, I don't know about you two, but my perception, I think, is pretty accurate. Not a whole lot of electronic usage.
Nope.
You're not really seeing electronics in drift boats out west. You're definitely not seeing it on the trout streams in Wisconsin.
No, I've never seen one on a raft either.
No, I've heard about someone using a down imager on a hooligan in Wisconsin.
Okay.
I won't throw him under the bus, but one guy. And I mean, there's reason for that.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
pretty useless on a 4-foot wide creek when you don't have a boat.
Yeah, it's like the intersection of practicality and some of the aesthetics and soul of where fly fishing came from, right?
Yeah, and just from a fishing efficiency, usually you can see the fish.
Mm-hmm.
They're not super. They're not hiding. They're not on some 4,000 acre lake. They're not, kicking your teeth in because they never eat.
Right.
It's never begged the use of it. It's never kind of demanded it.
Right.
Same with bass fishing too. I don't really think a lot of people, at least again, the fly angling community. If anything, there's probably more anti-electronic sentiment. Like you said, Jake.
Yep.
It's not why I do it. I don't need it. It's kind of this
right.
puffing the chest out moment of I don't need that to catch fish.
Right. Right. I think there's an interesting evolution too, of just the history of fly angling, right? And certainly when you look at the western trout rivers and things like that, where you're talking about a comparatively higher density population, that the history of fly angling incentivized and encouraged things like reading the water and things like that. And when you combine a high density species in a certain area with skills like reading water, and then the practical implications of it just being hard to run electronics in those types of areas, I think for a really long time there wasn't any need. And then of course there's room in the conversation for the soul of a thing, right? So the soul of fly fishing. But as the sport evolves and we move into especially pursuing fish species that are a lot lower density, then the sport evolves, the technology evolves, right? And so I think right now we're in that moment of trying to catch up to the technological advances and reorganize and redefine what it all means.
Well, and especially I think where it really starts to swirl in fly fishing is with muskie, as it's, again, we've talked about this before. It's not new, but I think as the more savvy electronic users come into picking up fly rods, they don't think twice about it. It makes sense.
Right.
Like, well, what do you mean? I'm still I got to find them. I got to find the bait. I'm still on a 10,000 acre flowage system. I can't use electronics because now I have a fly rod in my hand.
Right. Yeah. So where people came to musky fly fishing from matters, right?
Yep. In the hands of somebody that know what they're doing exactly, it could be very, very effective, and not detrimental to the environment or the species, which we'll talk about in a little bit.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a professional photographer can do a lot of damage with an iPhone, but there's a lot of folks out there that have the most high-end DSLR camera, and they barely know 5% of its functions as well.
Yeah, guilty as charged. I only know 5%
Power
of my
button,
iPhone's
auto
functions.
mode.
Yep.
Done.
Autocorrect.
Josh is gonna leave. Well, and then of course, like in the like maybe a world that is, I don't want to say on the opposite end of the spectrum, but at least in terms of electronics, you look at like walleye or bass fishermen, and I mean those boats, tournament bass boats, are literally, they look like spacecrafts. I mean, 5 screens, every piece of like $30,000 worth of electronics, and I think some of that does make sense. I mean, you're talking about a gentleman just won a bass tournament. I believe he cashed a $300,000 check.
Yep.
Like, if I could use a harpoon, I would use it for that. If you're, I mean, there's a little bit of ethical, but there's reasons for it. They're using it. It still rubbed me a little weird. I don't know did you see that one video? I might have shared it with both of you. It felt like it was like Jim Nance announcing the Masters.
Yep.
But it was over the top of, I think the guy that won the tournament. I can't remember his name all of a sudden. But it was like him, like, there he is. There it is. There's the fish on the screen. We're watching the screen, and he's going to, he found one. It's going to eat it. It's going to eat it. And there, yes, it ate it.
Yeah. Opens up an interesting market there for fishing tournament color commentary.
Yeah. I can't say I knew or had any like immediate what's wrong with this.
Yeah.
But it was just like, that is kind of hilarious. Yeah. So we're not going to go too far down that rabbit hole. We really want this to center around musky fishing. I think that's where we have at least enough experience to talk about it. I have spent all 0% of my life in tournament bass boats. But I think that, just to clarify that. And then I think secondly, we want to talk about, especially maybe for the fly angler audience, like, what are we, when we say these words, Livescope, side imaging, what do we mean? Because I think there's a little bit of confusion there. I've heard it from some where literally, if they see a screen in your boat, they kind of are like, you think it's Livescope.
Yeah.
And frankly, if we go back a really long time, when this technology started to come out, the fish locators, I think it was literally called fish locator, LOK. There was still that exact same sentiment of, oh, this is ruining fishing. Now we can see everything. And all you could literally see was a flasher. And I think that's just how technology seems to go, right? As new stuff comes out, there's haters, there's early adopters, they clash, and it gets figured out after that. But what are we actually talking about? So just for, again, avoidance of doubt, we're going to miss something here, but the high points are, there's really 3 brands that make major products here. We have Lowrance, Garmin, Humminbird. You have down imaging, which is probably what everyone is most commonly used. Really just gives you depth. Your transducer is going to give you depth. It's got a water temperature sensor on it, and it pings sonar pretty much down in a cone. Some of them have those little fancy fish icons that don't really work. But in the realm of musky fishing, even gear, not the super most important tool. Not crazy, didn't change the game or anything like that. Then you introduced side imaging. I believe Humminbird was the first one to come out with that. And not to use this term over the top, but definitely changed the game for a lot of musky fishing.
Yeah.
You could see fish on it reliably. You could see structure a lot better. You could find fish.
Mm-hmm.
I use it. I know some of our guides also use it. It's a tool, but different. Side imaging is going to be basically shooting out off the back and giving you kind of a historical picture of either side of the boat. Really good at picking up bigger fish, schools of fish, structure. You can make out rocks. You can make out weed. You can even start to make out soft and hard bottom. And you can also, if you've seen some videos online, literally see your flies and baits in the figure eight as they come past the transducer. And then we have what we're going to talk about today, forward-facing sonar that kind of gets labeled as Livescope. Livescope is really a Garmin product. Then you have Lowrance's Active Target, I believe. And what the one I have is the Mega Live from Humminbird. So those kind of all get put in the forward-facing sonar. This is a little bit of the boring setting the stage, but just want to make sure everyone else kind of learns that. Livescope, I think, is what people call it because it's captured. The name works really well because what it does is it really gives you a real-time, live, forward-looking image that is incredibly accurate. I mean, some of the things you can see, you can make out fish. You can tell the difference sometimes between things like sturgeon and muskies. You can see movement as that fish is moving across the screen. And then where it's really changed, I think, a lot of people's fishing for muskies is you can see reactions. You can see your bait on the screen. You can see how the fish is reacting to it. You can see fish in figure eights that you wouldn't have seen with your eyes. They literally will show up on the screen. And that's really, it is powerful. No doubt you should go see some videos about it on YouTube if you don't know what we're talking about. It's crazy cool from just a objective technology. I think it's pretty cool. I like new tech. It sometimes is bad, but I think generally it's pretty sweet, at least in my opinion. So that's kind of like my little soapboxy, what the hell are these things called? And then thirdly, what's our experience with any of these products? I mean, very quickly, I think we've all had a little bit, by no means Livescope experts, by no means really electronics power users, but we've all dabbled a little bit with some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
What about you, Jake?
Yeah, so up until maybe a year and a half ago, my experience with the electronics was really minimal. But last winter picked up a new boat, river jet boat, and have side imaging, so side scan as well as down imaging on that. The interactions I've had with Livescope have been completely like theoretical and watching stuff on YouTube like you just talked about until just the other day when we went out and kind of put eyes on what the technology looked like in real time, face to face. So it was neat to like have a personal interaction with something that had been like really just conceptual prior to, and I think it didn't necessarily change my mind completely, or there were no like profound, oh my god, now I see it completely differently. But it's just like you have a conversation about a thing that you don't totally understand, and part of the reason you don't understand it is because you've never actually been in a boat looking at what it does, what it can do, what it can't do, what it would potentially work for, what its limitations are, which I think is an important part of the conversation, and maybe not a part of the conversation that always gets brought up when people discuss the benefits and the cons of the technology.
And not to just like jump into that tangent, but you mentioned limitation, and I mean, we were in 3 feet muck bottom, heavily weeded portion of the lake looking for bass, and it was pretty limited. I mean, it's there's a lot of particle matter in the water at that point. It was windy and all sorts of stuff from previous winter was kind of getting blown in there. So we actually had to go out to water where we wouldn't have fished to just kind of get a clear view of it. Which again, though, we've, and I think just bleeding into mine, and then I want to hear from Josh. I really hadn't used it at all. I have been running side imaging for a couple of years. I love that on lakes, especially. But I got a new boat, and kind of along the exact same lines you were saying, I was like, I gotta at least fish with it for a season. Otherwise, I have really no valuable opinion. I generally don't have a valuable opinion to begin with, but if I've never used it, I'm just part of the hating on technology because I'm scared of the future camp. And so far, I am geeking out about it. I think it's gonna allow me to do some things with a fly rod that I've struggled to really do consistently, fishing at night, seeing figure eights, especially in really low clarity water in the Madison chain. We can get really low clarity when the algae booms come, and it's unless that fish is right on your fly, you might not know it's there. So situations like that, I think it could be helpful. The drawback so far is it's a lot of schlepping.
Yeah.
I got it rigged on one of those poles that goes off the starboard or aft side of the boat. It's like you got to plug it in. You can't drive with it. It can bump into things. You got to turn it and put it down. And not really what I enjoy about fishing. I want to fish. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. We'll see.
Yeah,
we'll talk about it a little bit more.
There are barriers to the entryways into running this technology, and certainly one of them could be just like hassle factor, right? Like that ability to just leave your house and go fishing. Like there is an element of every technology that you run, but certainly technologies that include like using boom arms off the side of your boat and things like that. That like it is, like you said, there's some schlepping going on, and
in a very heavily schlepping endeavor to begin with. I mean, we're not usually.
Yeah, and like deploying and then restoring and then redeploying and then restoring yeah.
What about you, Josh?
Yeah, I'm kind of in the beginner spectrum as well with electronics, and my background it stems a lot more deeply from the ice fishing side of things. So that's how I kind of got really introduced and more comfortable with electronics. So using your basic Vexilar flasher, so that in and of itself has been a lifesaver in a lot of scenarios where it's a very finicky bite, very light bite, or we're having trouble finding fish throughout the season as it progresses, and it's helped in that regard. But there's been plenty of days where we've outfished folks that when we weren't using flashers or anything, and they had all the best technology and whatnot as well. And then inversely, I went out with a group of guys this year that were all tech heads, and we had 2 live scopes running, an AquaView, a couple flashers out on the lake. We found tons of fish, and between the 8 dudes, I think we iced like 6 crappies that day. So we'll get into that side of it as well. It doesn't make
them bite.
Fish bite.
Yep.
Also,
but you would have probably not seen as many of those fish and had
correct.
that like confidence of like they were there, they just weren't biting what we had.
Yep.
That linkage wouldn't have been as strong without live scope in that situation.
Yep. And it kept us engaged all day, and we were having fun just watching fish and whatnot. And then on the musky side of things in open water, this is my second jet boat. I've had electronics on both boats. I stepped it up this year with some side imaging as well. So I'm just kind of getting my feet wet with that. I've had down imaging. And then I've just always been in these scenarios where we're running these rugged trips on the river, or we're traveling distances, and sometimes your electronics, they get jostled around and everything. So they might not be as reliable as you'd like them to be once you actually get onto the water. But
more batteries to charge, more things that can break.
I am excited to use what I've learned as the foundation of like reading rivers and whatnot, and now pairing that with the capabilities of side imaging and just cross-referencing like, okay, I always thought there was like some structure here because we've done really well, and now confirm it with what comes up on the graph. So we'll see.
And that kind of leads into, I guess, let's talk a little bit about why there's been so much drama swirling about this. And to start, just to piggyback on what you were saying, I think one of the points I've heard the vitriol throughout on the internet is you can buy experience now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can, the time on the water, learning those bodies of water, you can effectively, you know, spend a couple grand on, have a live scope, and you've just supplanted all of that experience.
Just blow through the learning curve.
Yeah, and I think I'm definitely on the fence about that. I think that's a lot of fear mongering. I don't know that it does that. I mean, a little bit, but I don't know that it's gonna. You still got to know, like, if you have no idea where muskie spawn, if you have no idea what structure they relate to, lakes are huge, man. You're gonna spend a lot of gas in the boat, and that in itself is kind of experience gaining. So there is some. Obviously, I don't know how you guys feel about that. There's definitely some room for it to speed up the learning curve tremendously.
Yeah. To me, it feels like that's a more hollow or sort of empty argument. If you're talking about a completely inexperienced musky angler, and you put them on, like, give them a boat that has live sonar, and then saying that they just bought experience because now they're going to go out and bag a bunch of huge muskies. That feels like sort of like you said, kind of a fear mongering or sort of like a knee jerk reaction. To me, it doesn't seem like it's going to shorten the learning curve appreciably for brand new anglers to becoming like excellent musky anglers, or even not becoming excellent musky anglers, but people who catch a ton of muskies. It feels to me like there's more room for discussion in terms of it shortening the learning curve from the person who's been musky angling for a while and was running a boat with no technology, and they're pretty good already. But that bridging the gap from someone who catches a few muskies but really likes it, and then getting that technology and becoming someone who increases their catch rate and their size rate. So like closing the gap from good to great, rather than beginner to good.
Yep, and water body specific. But you brought up something there that reminded me. I think I just saw Noah Binsfield, who we saw at the last Musky Expo. He was on Keys. They did an awesome episode this year. I think he just announced on Facebook that he just got Helix Mega Side Imaging. He's and I was shocked when I saw that. I don't know Noah well, so there might have been but I was like, no way. He's just starting to use side imaging. He slays muskies. This is, so I think there's a good to great gap filling for sure potential, and especially water body specific. That being said, another point of the swirling, probably where the drama boiled over the most, was this summer in Eagle River at the PMTT, where two gentlemen, to give credit where credit is due, kicked butt, and I mean, just blew away the field for one event in Eagle River. And I think that drama became so pervasive because they had a lot of this technology in the boat. We don't know for sure how much. I don't know either of these gentlemen personally. This is all secondhand information, but it led an absolute uproar. Was it just a lot of grown men jealous and mad that they got their butts kicked? Possibly. I feel like we all have a little bit of that with us fishing, that little bit of but it literally led the PMTT to ban this technology for the final two events of last year. And then again, they came out for 2023 and said there will be no forward-facing sonar usage allowed during the tournament fishing. And I think that was a very interesting. And there's also then swirled in that was this whole hashtag no scope movement, which I don't know if you guys saw any of that or what you think, but it was I'm sure it will still happen this year. Where you see some folks kind of saying look at me, I'm still catching these fish without this, which I don't know what that really says about anything. Probably just more the tribal mentality of
throwing
fishing.
up our flags, right?
Yeah,
throwing our flags.
This is how I do it. I throw a fly and I don't use Livescope, therefore I am the greatest. What else? There is a little bit, I think, and this we'll kind of come back to this piece on the ethical considerations, but you also hear the term associated with the Livescope usage of road hunting. and maybe just take a second. And that is effectively, the power users, let's just say, for lack of a better term, of Livescope, basically not casting rods until they find a fish on Livescope. Driving around the boat, driving, running it, probably picking up some stuff on side imaging, and then using Livescope to basically confirm that is a muskie right there cast. And, I think that in and of itself is different than what was going on with the PMTT drama, but very related. I think it makes a lot of guides, especially, pretty angry. You now have this weird kind of phase of adoption where they might have once been angry, but now they're like quietly getting on board. Mm-hmm. There's a couple of those in fly fishing actually for muskies where I know of two pretty good guides who have it. One of them for sure does not publicly state that he uses it or take pictures of the screen or claim, you wouldn't know. Mm-hmm. And the other one, I think is showing like, oh, check out this, it's cool. Mm-hmm. Which I find that interesting. I use it in the closet, but I don't want anybody to know. Mm-hmm. I'm a closet live scoper.
Yeah. Yep. Versus the just totally transparent. Like, here's a part of my program. I think it's cool. If you think it's cool, then let's have a discussion about it. If not, there's a lot of other people that don't use it.
Right.
Yeah. That like clarity and.
From a style points perspective, that could be frowned upon, amongst the community of elitist fly anglers. But he's out there. The stakes are higher. He's trying to make a living off of this industry, so he's got to stack the odds in his favor. And there's really nothing wrong with that. The clients are going to be a lot happier. He's going to have a much higher success rate if he knows how to effectively use it, and then ultimately he'll get more trips out of it. So good on him for doing that.
It is. I just wonder sometimes if there's a little bit of a race to the bottom, where if your justification is I guide, therefore I do this to make money, it's just, well, if they would allow you to electrofish, would you do that?
Right.
Mm-hmm. Or if they allow you to, net rivers, would you do that?
Yep.
And I think we have to, I don't know, we're not at that point because I think the regulations are pretty good. Like they don't allow you to do any of those things. Mm-hmm. There's limits, you can't keep muskies, there's size limits, etc. Mm-hmm. But that logic to me kind of fails a little bit. I hear it and I kind of agree with it, especially right now. Yeah, dude, use the technology you have to be the best guide you can. Mm-hmm. But as a collective, we're all
I think
running towards a cliff.
It reinforces what I was talking about with the transparency piece, right? Fishing in general is a thing that is informed by tons and tons and tons of decision points. As anglers, whether we're fly anglers or we're traditional gear anglers or whatever type of fishing that someone might do, as you go down the road of becoming more passionate about it and doing it at a higher level, there are so many different choices that we make, right? And so as long as somebody is transparent about their methodology, especially in the guiding industry, then it empowers the end consumer or the client to make a choice, to make a decision. And I think that's a part of this conversation with LiveScan that I think is so important, is not outsourcing our individual power to make choices that we believe in, that reflect our values, reflect our ethics, knowing that the Fish and Wildlife and the DNR regulations are going to constantly be on the front foot to try and make sure that we're not doing anything truly detrimental to the fishery. And knowing that as a community of anglers, we have a track record of policing ourselves, not always perfect and not always on time.
Musky community is pretty good about that.
Really,
I will give us all that. Obviously, there's folks way before any of us, but generally, catch and release, the whole catch and release.
Exactly.
Aspect. Whoa.
That the combination of those Fish and Wildlife and DNR regulations and us as a community of anglers, especially musky anglers, doing things proactively to protect the fisheries, protect the fish themselves, that in that context, then each individual angler gets to make a choice that or a series of choices that reflects their beliefs, their opinions, their definition of the soul of the type of fishing that they're doing. That I think is such an important part of the conversation, rather than jumping to these massive implications. Like, I believe it, thus you do too.
Right.
I practice it, thus you must too. Right.
Well, and it's similar. I want to bring up kind of on that topic, because you've said this to me earlier, how this conversation has these parallel similarities to like the crossbow conversation and deer hunting, and the, like, for lack of a better term, reaping conversation in turkey hunting.
Absolutely. There's a ton of parallels in, like, my background prior to being an obsessive musky angler was being an obsessive archery hunter for whitetails. And there, I think the conversation reaches the same level of emotional investment. It reaches the same sort of fever pitch, but in different types of technologies, right? And as we see the increasing development of things like cellular trail cameras and things like that, that really do give like hunters the ability to pursue their game in a different way. But
it comes back to the fish and wildlife too, because I don't, on a high level, again, not experts on this topic, but I know enough to weigh in a little, which is we don't have a deer decline issue.
Right.
So the usage of crossbow, the DNR basically encourages that, at least allows for it, because like at least in Wisconsin, deer harvest rates have gone down progressively for the last several years. And that, like, you know, you're going to get car insurance companies angry if that keeps happening. But then flip the script to the turkey hunting, and I think there you might see some regulation come out there, because first point is, like, you literally have guys walking around in camo, not blaze orange, with turkeys on their head. Someone's going to get shot.
Yep.
And two, the turkey populations are a little bit more sensitive than the whitetail populations. We're going to see.
And that's a really important difference too. I think that's worth talking about, is like in the hunting industry, when a brand new technology comes out that helps significantly improve the odds for hunters in any way, every time that new piece of technology is used successfully, there is one less animal in the woods, in the habitat, right? So if, like, a cellular trail cam is used and someone walks in based on a real-time photo that they got and harvests a deer, if you're able to use the like reaping technology to crawl across a cornfield and shoot a tom at 10 yards, if you're able to use a crossbow, and as a result of using that crossbow, you didn't have to hold your bow back at full draw for 35 seconds and then miss your shot, right? And you're successful because of that technology, then you've taken an animal permanently out of the habitat. And I think that's an important difference when we talk about the evolution of fishing technology, especially in the muskie world, where we have reached a point where the vast majority of muskie fishing is not a harvest-based endeavor. Catch and release angling with muskies is pervasive in a huge way.
It's the one somewhat tribe we all subscribe to,
right?
In muskie fishing.
So even if Livescope, if what we learn about Livescope down the road here is that it immensely changes the success rate of anglers, then what we're talking about in terms of keeping the fishery healthy, keeping the population healthy, is we're having a conversation predominantly about making sure that we're limiting catch and release mortality. But the vast majority of those fish are going back into the water, again, because of DNR and wildlife regulations, as well as the popular, like, influence of musky fishermen and women policing themselves. We're talking about a technology that helps you potentially catch more fish, a lot of which are going back into the water, if not all of which are going back into the water.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's like, it almost begs the question of, like, man, we need the next phase of musky technology needs to be around that. Like, if we could, standardize handling or recovery, it's interesting. I have a funny story though, kind of, and then we'll keep moving on to another aspect of this, but just in relates to, like, how, does Livescope fast track experience, and does it shorten the learning curve? And I think, sure, there's definitely areas it does, but then there's also just areas where it kind of highlights the finicky, funny human nature. So I was out, I think it was the 2020 season, so it was still fairly new. Like, there's less people using it back then, but we knew about it. A gentleman was out on Lake Winona, and he definitely had Livescope. I don't know if he was musky fishing, but he was fishing, and he was using Livescope, and you can tell because of the way that it is, and that is because he was at the front of his boat, staring at a screen, and just you could tell he was driving around like in weird, erratic circles in this one point, looking down at the screen, trying to get a good angle, adjusting his handle on the Livescope bar to just perfectly see whether it was a school of fish or a muskie. And we're watching him do this for probably 5 to 10 minutes, just like frantic. And he stops, and he gets a spot.
Yeah. Spot
Lock, fish. He's
Yeah.
like, I did it. Livescope helped me find him. And literally in that spot, swirling over his heads, were like 25 angry seagulls and birds.
Yep.
And you just kind of,
Bingo, right
we had
there.
this.
Thank God for technology.
We had this perspective because we're 200, 300 yards away. But it just is like sometimes it's right there in front of your face.
Mm-hmm.
The muskies are still going to be muskies. The fish, the natural world still goes on. It still moves on despite how many sonar pings we send at it.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, that was pretty funny. At least I found it funny. I guess some questions to, like, how do we think about this? Is there anything specific? I think we've probably covered it, but why this gets so much hate in fly fishing? And that's really not just Livescope, just electronics in general. And is there any sense to that, or is it all just like, no, we should put that to bed? It's not. I don't know where either of you guys stand. I personally use it when it's a good tool. It's not always a good tool.
Mm-hmm.
On rivers that are really high turbidity and you need a drift boat to get down it, and you got rapids, and it's not always the best tool. It's really shallow.
Yeah. I think
Use your eyes.
my response, and I think that's all any of us can do, right? It's just sort of like respond to the issue on a personal level and not try and apply that personal response.
That's all this is, folks. Just 3 terrible opinions.
Terrible opinions. Yeah, baseless and unfounded. I think part of the reason that I started fly fishing is because there's that sort of historical soul that is maybe in a little bit of a different track than other types of angling, right? So that even just the process of tying small flies, like a diminutive little thing that placed in an elegant way creates a really cool, fun, magnificent response. I think that historical soul of that pursuit overlaps with some of the same reasons for me that I love archery hunting as well, right? It's that there's enough room in the party for everybody to sort of pick and choose different styles and different ways to approach it. That's something that's always appealed to me. I think that maybe some of the outrage when it comes out, when it flows forth in like enraged or impassioned ways, feels like a violated contract to some of the people who chose fly fishing specifically because of that sort of minimalist, maybe in some ways connected on a different or deeper level to the habitat. And in our head,
It's not your granddad's fly fishing.
It's not your granddad's fly fishing, and we sort of create definitions and identities to the things that we love that's based on the reasons that we chose it. I think, and I'm not certain, but it does feel like when people really get mad about technology and fishing in general, and certainly about Livescope, it feels like there's a contract that has been violated in their perception of what they were doing.
It's kind of almost like, I get it, but I still think you're a hack.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
That's not fly fishing.
Right.
It's kind of the vibe I get, is it comes from that older traditional, more pure fly fishing aesthetic. Because it's like comparing what you're saying, which I agree with. I think we all see that. Like in the fishing world, the musky conventional world, it's kind of this like, I hate the use of it because of how you're able to do and what you're able to do and the ethical considerations you're able to do to the fish. But in the electronics fly fishing world, it's kind of like, I hate what you are evolving this brand into. Like, no.
Yeah.
That's not what I want.
Yeah, it's like a forest in a trees situation where like maybe a lot of the fly angling community resists technology in general because they see it as a way that the entire forest changes, right? And that maybe each individual piece of technology in a type of fishing that just is more comfortable with increased technology use because it's been more prevalent, they have the ability to look at each individual piece of technology on a closer level and say like, what's good about this particular thing or bad about it.
Right.
Whereas like maybe sometimes the fly
Agreed.
community is like the general concept of all of these technologies is incoherent or incompatible with like that historical soul of the thing.
Right.
And so they're trying to have multiple conversations at once.
And it's almost like you have to slow feed them a little bit because we could probably sit down with those folks. Again, we're not saying, man, we can't wait to use Livescope in the driftless next week. Like, just like kill me now, done.
Yeah.
Don't even want anything to do with that. But in the musky world, it's like you have to slow drip. It's like, okay, do you agree that this is a fly rod? It looks a little beefier.
Yeah.
Okay, yes. Do you agree that this thing that we made with a bobbin and a vise is a fly? It doesn't look like a parachute Adams, but it's beef. Yes. You see the fly line. We make fly cast. We go whippy whippy. Okay, we're still fly fishing. We're in alignment.
Yeah.
Now we're on, I take you in your drift boat and I pluck you and I put you in the middle of the Chippewa flowage and you don't have a transducer or a map.
Yeah.
Like you have a paper map, but you don't have any idea where your boat is or what is beneath you because there's no current, there's no structure reading of the river. You kind of have to like get them to that point.
Yeah.
Like this is when it enters the conversation.
Right. Yeah. Now your drift boat.
It'd be
is
like
gonna have
fishing.
a motor on it.
Yeah, it'd be like fishing without a hook on.
Yeah.
In some senses.
Yeah. I don't have the luxury of 40 years of dedication to this flowage, so I need to figure this out. Or I didn't have a grandfather that spent his entire life learning every nook and cranny of this. We got to pull back the curtain a little bit just because this body of water is so overwhelming, and we gotta find something to start with here.
Yeah, and it has to to keep people interested enough to care about these resources. You have to evolve, even if it hurts a little bit.
Yep.
There would just, and it does have its bad consequences, but I think that's the vocal minority that comes out a little bit, not the mass of like, no, there are more people that care. There are more people that care and sign up for Muskies Inc. because they can put an auto chart chip in and go fish that huge lake and figure out fisheries that we would not have figured out before. I know I kind of lean a little bit more to like, well, yeah, I grew up fishing big lakes. There's no way I would feel a little blind if especially with a fly rod. Like I have a fly rod. We don't have any knowledge to draw upon. We are admitting we kind of are going out in the huge acres of woods with a bow. Like we need something else. We got to spend more time scouting.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think that reading water is a really important skill, and everybody should learn it regardless of what technology you choose to use or don't. And there are a bunch of those sort of like foundational skills that I think are really important for every angler to learn to use effectively in the times and places where they should use them. And I don't think any technology should be defined in a way so that it supplants or replaces that. But then also have an honest conversation about the ways that a lot of these technologies are being used. So like if you're in the middle of a giant lake, there is no reading water skill that you can deploy. Right. So
you have like a really long pole and you just go poking around at the bottom.
Right.
It feels like gravel.
Using Livescope on a gigantic lake is somebody's way of shortcutting reading water, because you can't read water other than reading whether it's really choppy or it's flat on a giant flat pancake of a lake. Right. And
look at a topo map and be like, I think I'm in this rough spot.
Yeah.
Like, I'm close to the island.
And in some of the places where reading water is the most valuable, you're talking about moving water, oftentimes fairly swiftly moving water, oftentimes not super deep water. Yep. And so the Livescope may not have as silver bullet-y type of beneficial impact as we might think in those environments. So then again, it's not supplanting or replacing the importance of being able to read water. And so I think for me, that brings the temperature down on my response to it. And I think the more that I have learned about Livescope, the more variables I have found that all sort of like in combination bring the temperature of my response down to it. And I still have an opinion on whether I'll use it or not. And it like right now, it just doesn't seem super likely that I'm going to be a fly angler that defines himself by the use of live sonar technology. But
I'm going to wear the scarlet letter on my chest.
Yeah. L.
Big L.
Yeah. But my opinions on it, the more I learn about it for various reasons, whether it's through like speaking to people smarter than me about the health of fisheries and muskie populations, whether it's about going out with people who have the technology and learning what it actually does, what it doesn't do. Like everything that I learn about it so far has sort of like moved me in a direction of defining my own relationship or opinion to it, but also cooling down that barometer and starting to honestly think that it's sort of incoherent how angry people seem to be about it.
Yeah, totally. And you made a good point too, which is like there are literally a lot of the creeks and small rivers that we fish in this state that there are similar, in other states, whether it's Kentucky or Minnesota. It would be a major, I would honestly argue, unless someone can prove to me otherwise, it would be a major distraction. Like you have boulders and riprap and all sorts of obstructions in the river. You need to navigate the boat. You need to set up your two anglers in the front and back so they have good casts. There's stuff that gets tangled. We're moving down the river. Your eyes are telling you so much because of the reading water comment. Like we all can like hop on a river and be like, oh, that's a slunch. I want to cast there. And that's not always right. The fish could be in a different spot, but you can pick it apart and figure it out in a way. Livescope to me, it would just be a cluster. It would just be chaos of like more crap in the boat that is already the algorithm doesn't work for me in that situation.
I 100% agree. I would much rather get rid of all of my electronics on the boat and invest in the most high-end trolling motor system I possibly could, because that's the workhorse of where we fish, and especially if I'm fishing by myself.
And as a guy running a jet, I would, way before I started running a really advanced live sonar, I would just love real-time depth information. As I'm running shallow waters in jet boats, that would, to use the cliche, that would be a game changer to me, maybe more than anything, to know exactly what I was about to hit before I hit it instead of after I hit it.
Santa, if you're listening, Jake wants depth finder.
Am I going 20 miles an hour while I hit this boulder or 30 miles an hour?
Give me forward-facing depth. That's what I want. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. So you kind of alluded to this, and it just like piggybacking on the last podcast we recorded. So thanks to those that listened and tuned in. Go check it out if you haven't. We talked about tracking muskies using radio telemetry, and I think that had prompted you to dig into a couple things, which would be kind of interesting to hear you talk about right now. And was like, is Livescope like one litmus test of this technology is like, are biologists using it? Is it making them better? And I don't know where we're at on that.
Yeah, it didn't seem to me, and certainly, I wouldn't claim that my attempts to find all of the answers were exhaustive or comprehensive. But
you just got to the first page of the Google search,
just
not the second or third. That's exactly how I do it. There's like 100 of them though. I wonder what happens if you keep going.
Google Scholar though, so I felt a little smarter about the whole thing. I think if you take a look at new technologies, it makes sense that some of the earliest adopters, or maybe not the earliest adopters, but the people who have one of the biggest stakes or claims to using technology to help learn more about fish and wildlife are the people whose job it is to know a lot about fish and wildlife, right? So your fish biologists, your
wasn't like the internet where the military invented it and then we got to use it later. That's not the case with Livescope.
I got curious about whether there were studies going on right now, or studies that had been done in the past where, like you said, we just finished up, or we are finishing up right now, a study tracking muskies using radio telemetry equipment, so an antenna and a receiver that is picking up a frequency from tags that are implanted, radio tags that are implanted into fish. And I got curious, are there right now, or have there recently been big, studies or research projects that have been done where the use of Livescope was used to help the efficiency, help detection rate, things like that. And I didn't find anything. And like I said, a lot of the people who I asked the same question to, who are smarter than me and who have a stake in that, couldn't think of any that were currently being done. Now, it's not that, I don't think that it's, I think there's a recency issue in the conversation too, right? So the technology, the way that we are using it, the way that we are seeing it is still relatively new. And it's not that this issue isn't being addressed at all, right? So we talked about and looked over some data that's coming out of the state of Arkansas, that's coming out of the state of Kansas, where it's not that they're utilizing Livescope in research, but they are actually doing research on the implications of Livescope in the angling community. It's
Not for muskie, though.
Not
right?
for muskies, right? So it's a little bit of an apples to oranges conversation, where both of those studies were looking at the use of Livescope among pan fishermen, specifically crappies.
And what were some of the
There were some
conclusions?
interesting findings. So if I'm remembering correctly, the Kansas study did not find any correlation or any evidence to suggest that running Livescope in their study made crappie anglers significantly more effective. They weren't catching way more fish. They weren't catching way bigger fish. And I believe the Arkansas study was similar, that they weren't, the anglers using Livescope weren't catching way bigger fish than the anglers not using it. In a little bit of an interesting thing with the Arkansas study, I mean, both of them were talking about a species that, number one, is actively harvested at a high degree, and number two, turns over quite a bit, right? So like more than 50% turnover each year, where the next year's,
Right.
the young of the year are going to replace the ones that are harvested this year. But in the Arkansas study, they did find that anglers running Livescope were catching more crappies than anglers that weren't. And interestingly enough, the study also showed that anglers running Livescope, despite catching more crappies than anglers that weren't, were releasing significantly more crappies than anglers not running Livescope, right? So they're catching more fish, but they also release significantly more fish than anglers that weren't running it, and they weren't catching bigger fish.
Right.
So there you go. Again, you start talking about like
The early adopters of this technology can also be like, they're, at least muskie world, they're deep muskie guys and girls who really care for the fish. They're not going to abuse the technology.
right.
Likely. It's just like what happens when boats come standard with it.
Yeah, and with the really high minimum harvest regulations for muskies, and then also the pervasive nature of catch and release ethic among muskie anglers, and then you add on top of that the fact that, at least right now, and you can tell me if you don't feel like this is correct, but my vibe right now is that the muskie anglers who are using Livescope regularly right now, at least, are people who are really far down, or are pretty far down the rabbit hole. They're people who have committed themselves personally and or professionally for many years to the pursuit of catching muskies. And so if you add in the first two variables about regulations and catch and release ethic, and then you add on that third layer of the majority of users being people who have committed a bunch of their life to catching muskies, I think you've got three insulating variables of preventing it from having a serious impact on the overall health of muskie fisheries and health of muskie populations. So that doesn't address other areas of the conversation that I still think are really valuable, but in terms of its impact on the overall health and sustainability and longevity of the fisheries, that seems like it.
It's also, it creates this issue where it's like, if the muskie community is going to divide themselves up over Livescope and who approves it and who doesn't, like that's not the problem to solve.
Right.
Like, let's all unite arms together and go, get rid of like wake boats. or implement fish no ski areas or no wake in certain spawn habitat or fish refuges. Like that's going to move the needle.
Right.
Theoretically, more water quality. There's so many bigger problems that would have a much bigger impact than
Right.
Livescope. That being said, I could see a day potentially where, like you have these small little lakes of maybe native muskies and, it's no boat motors, no electronics like allowed on the lake.
Yeah.
Like it wouldn't be too far. It'd kind of be weird and it would seem like we are missing the forest for the trees on what we're trying to solve, but like it could play itself out that way.
I think that's part of what I mean too, that like we have a track record of between our community and the wildlife and DNR organizations of catching up to technologies that are damaging in many different types of ways, right? Or just things that are damaging. And I can understand that maybe we don't know and we don't understand, and it would be hard to completely predict what the negative implications of these technologies are right this second. But I at least have faith that when we do understand them, then we will be able to react to them in a way that's informed by what we're seeing instead of what we're afraid that we might see.
Right. And kind of we're wading into the ethical considerations of all this, and it, just something you made me think about that we didn't even talk about before, but just like a little bit different of a perspective, I think, how could Livescope help us be better catch and release musky anglers? And you think about one of the we've talked about it on the podcast. One of the other angles that I think most musky anglers can get a little heated about is the midsummer peak bass fishing, catching a muskie, and what that can do. You have usually an angler who doesn't musky fish, so handling goes a little bit down. You have hot water. You have some of those variables kind of congregating.
Wrong tools, wrong net.
Yeah. Where theoretically, if that bass angler is now fishing that spot with Livescope, he may be able to, or she be able to tell that is in fact not a bass. That is a muskie. It still begs the question of, well, do I cast at it? But I don't think there are bass anglers out there personally trying to catch muskies to kill them in summer. I think it is more of a consequence of an accident. Just, not the right education, experience, whatever it may be, that happens. And this could perceivably help with some of that. Like those aren't walleyes below the dam in spring. Those are 3 muskies.
Yeah.
Let's go somewhere where the walleyes are.
Yeah, I think too, if you think about like my experience musky fly fishing, especially on rivers, especially on drift boats and things like that, is like running zero technology on those systems and in that way, the way that we do all the time. Like maybe you get a fish that comes out on a casual follow and it comes into the 8 and you work that 8 and you do the best that you possibly can in terms of like getting a commit to an eat boat side, and the fish, despite your best efforts, casually swims away, or you see it sort of like negative or neutrally oriented to your fly and move back to that location. I think I certainly have been guilty in the past of being like, that fish came in, it went back, and now I'm gonna like either back row or I'm gonna drop anchor and I'm gonna switch to a smaller fly or switch to a different presentation, or like kind of beat that fish up with flies is certainly something that I've done in the past. And I think that there's room in the conversation for how does increasing the technology not just hold the potential harm for misuse, but the potential benefit, not even just to success rate, but like the potential benefit of using the technology to make like an informed choice for the overall health of the fish or the fishery, right? So now you see a fish on Livescope, and certainly there would be a potential if a fish is neutrally or negatively orienting to your bait or fly as you see it on your screen, to just hammer that fish with just tons and tons and tons of different presentations and hassle it into eventually responding with an eat. But I think there's also...
You could also do that before Livescope, though, too.
You could do it
just
before
park the bus
Livescope.
below a dam and just
and
work it over.
if you see that fish on Livescope not reacting to the first couple of presentations, now in a way that I never had before, I'm able to say like, okay, well, that fish is not responding. And maybe it's not just that I'm like my
Right.
pattern sucks.
Right.
Maybe it's that there is a biological factor preventing that fish from responding right now, and maybe I'll leave it alone rather than just hammering it with everything I've got.
Well, it's like it allows us to floss muskies,
Yeah.
like you can do with steelhead or trout or suckers or something. Like, I don't know if it ate or if I just dragged the hook into its mouth and I set the hook, which I think is muskies. I think present that could be problematic because it's we all get driven to that level a little bit at some point in the season or in your fishing life with muskies. Get driven to like a little madness about it. Like, genuinely, why is this not working for me right now? And it just opens the door to like, oh, now it's still, there's a million things that have to go right. You have to find that muskie. It has to stay there. You have to know how to use Livescope. You have to be able to put there's not a lot of people out there doing it, but I think there's an ethical consideration that is interesting, specifically with a large fish like muskies and Livescope that you kind of touched on. And it's like the flossing or I hate to even admit it, but there's like a total, just seeing it on the screen, there's a total ability to be like, there is my pounder. There is the muskie. There is the dorsal fin.
Right.
I don't have to say the rest. Like,
Right.
And that's, I think, terrible. But bringing it all the way back, there's not a whole lot of those folks in musky angling. There are a couple. There are always going to be the exceptions to the rule. But as you're like, genuinely, we want to catch and release them. You know, if you kill that muskie, you don't get to see it get bigger. You know, there's a lot of like, if you over-educate that fish by just sitting on it for 12 hours,
right?
Like, usually it doesn't actually work either. Like, it's not like it clicks on the sixth cast every time. And at the end of the day, you've pretty much trained that one not to eat flies anymore.
Yep.
Unlike some of the other fish. So what about kind of, I think there's another piece here, like in the why is this ultra sensitive to muskies? And no science here, but there has been some rumors about fish basically learning about the sonar, like having sonar aversion. We've seen net aversion with the DNR. They talk about that.
Yeah.
How the big fish get kind of like, no thanks.
Yeah.
So in ice fishing, you can actually hear that transducer clicking.
Above, yeah, okay.
So like if you were to pull that transducer,
Which you
out
can
of the
hear
water,
a side imaging
you can hear
transducer
that
too.
as well. So there are definitely instances where if you're seeing some marks on your screen and you just can't get them to eat, you turn off that flasher and you start jigging. They're not getting pinged now with that sonar, that tick, 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 tick. And
There's musky folks that have talked about that too.
Yep.
Like if you know a fish is there, you turn the trolling. I mean, we've probably all experienced it. I know I have with trolling motors.
Yeah. Cut the electronics.
Yeah, they won't come in near a trolling motor.
And that brings up a good question. Like, and back to your road hunting comment. Now you're just looking around for fish. You find them, you spot lock or anchor, and now you sit on that fish with all of your electronics off. Yeah.
Yeah, that feels dicey to me.
Yeah. And it's like where as you kind of stated, like where is the line get gray between like, well, Livescope doesn't make them eat, but it does allow me to stay on the fish until it does.
Yeah.
Yep.
You know, I got a new Dakota lithium battery. That thing is going to last me 4 days. I got snacks in the boat. I got water.
Yep.
I'm parking it. I'm not leaving until it's in the bag. You know, you could see that start to happen.
And although we don't know a lot of data at this point about like the effects of Livescope and the increased like catching rate of that stuff, but like if you go and find a fish, we do know data about some of their patterns and things like that on lakes and whatnot. So if you do find a fish one day at the beginning of the season with Livescope, in theory, you could just keep driving back to that spot every single day, even if you didn't have your Livescope with you, and just keep pounding the crap out of that fish. You know?
Yeah, assuming it was staying put.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think just to bleed into like one of the other topics, where is this effective and where is it just not going to work? We've talked about the river thing, but it's not just rivers. I mean, it's also certain lakes. Now there are certain bodies of water that I'm excited to go use it on because I have struggled out there and there's certain factors that would allow this to help us learn something. Do I think it's going to just be the key that unlocks the Pandora's box? No, but it might give me a breadcrumb. But then there's bodies of water like the Madison chain where occasions throughout the season, those fish are nose down in absolute slop in 5 feet or less of water. Side imaging does not pick them up. Livescope surely does not really pick them up. Like it good luck. You kind of, the technology isn't there. Someday we might have a AI chat GPT trolling motor attachment, but like there are drawbacks.
Yeah.
Where else is it like seemingly pretty effective? I don't know if places come to mind. We're obviously not going to name them, but I do get excited about just seeing it on some really big rivers. Rivers that feel a lot more like lakes.
Yep.
Yeah. Spots where rivers dump
Hard
into
bottom.
big, deep holes. Right. Yeah.
Where like we know there's one there, and it would almost just be like confirming or not. Like, was I right that day or wrong that day? It doesn't still get it to eat, but
yeah. I know that a lot of people that are using technology, especially things like side scan for fishing muskies too, are not out there running their technology looking for muskies. They're using their technology to identify the variables that make it much more likely for a muskie to be present, right? So like running side imaging to look for forage fish, and when you find high
it's
concentrations,
much more often than actually finding a muskie on screen.
and that's a question that I don't know, and if you guys know, I would love to learn about. Is live sonar a way to to use in that way, or is it specifically more designed to identify single fish, or could you use it effectively to identify the variables that really increase the likelihood of finding a muskie?
I haven't used it enough to answer that matter of factly. Based on some videos, it's definitely not going to help or not going to hurt.
Sure.
But just at the side imaging helps a ton. I mean, you can, that's rock. That's the transition between hard bottom and soft bottom. Things that we just didn't have a lot of insight into. There's a different type of, there's the heavy, dense weeds, and now I'm getting into the patchy stuff.
Right. Some of which you can even do with down imaging too, right?
True.
And so I guess one of the things that I think about is like, are we frustrated by the concept of a thing, or are we frustrated by the specific differences between this thing and its predecessors?
I think
right?
it's like heavily concept.
Have we come to terms with down scan or just traditional downward sonar? And have we sort of come to terms with side imaging? And are we now just furious because there's one thing more? Or are we right?
Or just like furious at like the powers that be. It's like, like now, dang it. Now I have to spend another $2,000. Right. This is getting out of hand.
And like even with the issue of like PMTT, with the outrage over the live scan use and the resulting catch rate at PMTT, would it have been the same if every boat in that tournament was running it? Right. I don't know. And I
have to ask the musky gods.
That's an interesting take, yeah.
Like, if everybody had it, would we be having the same conversation? Or is there a part of it right now, it's just that it's so new that some people have it, and it does probably provide some sort of advantage, and I think that just muddies the conversation and allows additional real estate for just being really, really mad, or mad about how much you love the technology, or mad about how much you hate the technology. Yeah. But like, for the conversation to be productive, we kind of got to like hang up on the idea of just being furious about something.
And I do think it goes back to your point about it's not going to take you from 0 to 1 in muskie very effectively. It's the same like, if I handed you today and you never musky fished and you got a brand new 620 Ranger, every rod from every, like you have your pick of the litter, unlimited budget, every bait, you got 4 live scopes. It's not going to do it for you.
Yeah.
Now you give those tools to someone who has already kind of figured out a little bit of the code, which keep in mind, we're all solving a little bit. We really don't know that much, as we talked about on the last one. It's probably going to help. But we also have yet to see, I think where the PMTT stuck out, and it was, what's interesting, it was both the PMTT and the same guys were the guys that caught the world record on the Mille Lacs using the same methods. So there were two kind of white swan or black swan events, depending on how you want to look at them, outlier events that I think is what started to kind of bring some of that about. Because other than that, at least from my perspective, there hadn't been like this 10x a factor.
Right.
And that's what a lot of technology, like when in my previous life, when we were talking about what was a good business, should this exist? Can we be successful with this startup? It was like you pretty much had to 10x the solution. If there was a problem and you thought you had a solution, it had to be 10 times better than the previous one. Otherwise, it was going to break down. Competition was going to catch up to you faster, like all of these things. And it's like, is there a 10x factor on Livescope right now? I don't see it, other than maybe 2 events. Or maybe everyone that's 10xing their musky fishing is keeping it quiet, not talking about it, which we're known to do for sure.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
I think it helps to like clarify if the fear of the consequences is fear of there being a threat to the population, or the fear of the accumulative impact of pressure. And like we know it, like increasing pressure on a fishery matters. It absolutely matters. But from a fisherman's or a fisher person's perspective, pressure is a bigger deal to me because it means that it's harder for me to go catch muskies, and it means that I probably won't catch as many, right? That is in some ways a different conversation than is there a significant threat to the specific population? Are muskies going to die at a higher rate than prior to this technology? And certainly if you increase the catch rate of muskies, then you're going to increase the catch and release mortality, because there is some catch and release mortality. But like part of it, what I think is important to clarify is like for voices that amplify the negative impacts and the negative consequences of this technology, are we talking about being worried about the increase in pressure? Because that means that it's going to be harder to catch them and that we're all going to catch less of them if we're not using the technology? Or are we legitimately concerned about the impact on the long-term viability of the species? And if that's the case, the awesome conversation.
We're probably all
ends,
aligned,
right?
Yeah, if that's the case. We haven't seen that yet. And one could, there's always this, like, one of the paradoxical aspects of this as a fishing as a business is it relates here, which is could be the silver lining to Livescope, which to me, I actually get a little tinge of optimism when you see, okay, to kind of go back in defense of the gentleman that caught the fish in Mille Lacs and at Eagle River Lake, we showed that there's still a giant muskies, inland muskies in the upper Midwest.
Yeah.
To maybe, if there was research that they weren't able to get those, like if that could be done in Madison, that would help us understand some things. To say, oh, wow, we do have a fishery that has the potential to have a 56, 57-inch muskie and be healthy. Because it was angler caught. We saw it. And it might bring investment back into the fishery or have us change our relationship or work with, the DNR in a different way. There's also, like, if you look at musky fishermen, and this is one of the most, like, confirmatory statements to me of, like, why I feel we need to continue to grow more musky fishermen, because they can be turned into money factories for musky fisheries. You have guys with Livescope, it just is more of that. $50,000 boat, $50,000 truck, $20,000 in electronics. That is a money printing machine for musky fisheries if we approach it the right way, if we give them the right information.
Yeah.
And I think that's where there's still so much blue sky in a lot of this. Because we would all, to your point, if Livescope created more pressured fisheries, but it also created more budget to create more fisheries or to fix fisheries or to bring fisheries back, there's this spreading out the fish, spreading out the pressure. The DNR will say it can't stock as many bodies of water in Wisconsin with muskies as they want. Right. It's expensive to grow.
Right.
And I think from my business background, that's not a book closed, shut, story over. That's like, well, where do we get the money? How do we have a musky fish hatchery?
Yeah.
you know, we would Muskies Inc. You know, there's ideas out there, so it's interesting that take.
Yeah, where are the opportunities for creative solutions?
Right. Every Livescope, 10% goes to the Livescope Musky Fish Hatchery, where you can buy a muskie and see it on camera. What would this is kind of an interesting take, and I think a couple more pieces here, but like, what do you think the OG masters of musky fishing would say, or even like the old fly fishing? You know, what would Lefty Cray say, or Norman McLean, or
Oh my gosh.
you know, like, do they even have a say? First of all,
Mhm.
I mean, everyone does. If us three jabronis do, but
Yeah.
like, what would Tom Gelb say? You know,
I think we'd lose them at TikTok.
we definitely lost Josh at TikTok.
I mean, some of the oldest musky anglers, it might be tough to hear their response over the sound.
Louis
of
Spray
22
would use
shell.
the shit out of Livescope, though.
Yeah,
You know it.
yeah. Just wouldn't be able to hear him over his
No.
22 blast.
No, he still wanted to use guns. Exactly. No,
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know that. I think it would be a lot of the same. You know, those young kids, they're just ruining everything. They don't appreciate it. Like, that just kind of seems to be a constant drum of one generation getting old and the next younger one coming up.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. I got all the respect in the world for the OG fly anglers and
100%.
yeah, that will never change.
Especially in
they
musky fishing. Like, they had
inspire and
nothing to go on.
inform, but like, yeah, I mean, a lot of the really truly pioneering fly anglers through history have fished for high density fish in high density areas, and so, you know, like, the response is sort of apples to oranges.
Correct.
You know.
I don't know if Norman McLean ever operated a boat for fish. It was
Mhm.
a metronome, maybe, but
Yeah.
no. Where does this go? Where is there a point, kind of, to put a little bit of a button on this? Where does this, like, can we go too far? Can we perceive of technology that goes too far? I mean, how when does AI come into fishing? You know, is it? I think the video game argument, like, does it literally become a video game eventually? I sure don't care for that at all. Like, I am literally, I spend my time in front of screens to make a living. I want to go fishing to do the exact opposite.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't have to worry about me. I'm going to use it. I'm going to play around with it. But like, most of the time, I'd rather stare at my fly than screen. But I think, yeah, it could bleed.
Yeah.
It could also flip the other way, where, like, you know, imagine a young kid growing up learning fishing and seeing how technology enabled it is. And he, like, has this bright idea to be like, I'm going to go be a, you know, contra fisherman and fish with nothing, no trolling motor. Like, the young generation will have to rebel some way, and it might be anti-technology.
I think maybe it's naive on my part. I don't think it is, but it's possible that naively, I just still do trust science, and I trust people that are smarter than me who study science, especially wildlife and fish biology and ecology. You ask about that, like, threshold, and it's so arbitrary and it's so moving for so many people. But for me, it is sort of like steadfastly that the second that any sort of technology is found by, like, scientific method to create a, like, present and serious threat to the overall health and sustainability of the fishery, then that's the red line for me. And as soon as that happens, then I think, both through community voice and through regulation, then it's time to pull the plug on that technology. But
even like you said, if it's a little late, it's usually pretty directionally accurate.
Right.
It's pretty directionally spot on.
I think it becomes so much more nebulous and like trying to hold sand in your hand when you talk about my own personal red lines for my type of angling, right? I told you that I run side imaging. I don't run it all the time. A lot of the time that I use it, like I said, I'm just using it because it's comforting for me to know how much water is between my bottom of my hull and the bottom of the river. But I don't see myself using live scan with any consistency, and I don't really see myself having it on my boat. But my personal relationship to the technology, I think I give myself permission for that to change and evolve.
Yeah.
Right? Because
You're an open-minded
always
individual
has
that uses
changed and
science to
evolved,
direct your
right?
beliefs. Wow, I wish there were more of you, Jake.
The hard fast for me truly is, like smart, passionate people who have dedicated their lives to studying the overall health of populations, especially fish and wildlife populations, coming out and saying, "Hey, we did some science on this, and this is no good. This is going to hurt the overall longevity of the species in general, and on a like site specific population level, this is detrimental. We should stop it." Then that's where I put my faith to put the governors or the restrictors on the advancements of technology.
So he's out. He's not using it. Can't even find him with radio telemetry. Livescope ain't going to work. What about you, Joshua?
Yeah, it just goes back to so many things. Like, I love connecting with nature. I love relying on my ability to read water and relying on my experience on the bodies of water. I'm comfortable fishing to get me through a successful day on the water or a successful season and whatnot. I think I would really despise going out there and becoming so attached to my Livescope that I'm constantly looking at the screen and totally forgetting about the seagulls that are feeding right above my head, or looking at CFS flows and
What has become of me? It'd be like this, like,
yeah. For me, I'm kind of a tech guy for things like photography and videography where I need to capture a good shot and whatnot. But like, when it comes to fishing and hunting and stuff like that, I'm kind of like in the OG mentality. I just want to get out there, put my head down, and grind it out.
Yeah.
And really enjoy like all the senses that come with fishing and being outside.
Yeah. I'm in the camp of I'm probably going to name it, and I'm going to develop like a her level relationship with my Livescope. So yeah. Watch out, Jen. No, I think as I said at the beginning, I want to use it at least for a season to figure out what it does. And I think specifically, especially with some of my personal life changes, fishing long 8-hour, 10-hour floats might not be as much in the cards in the next few years. So it's going to be short and sweet, but it's going to be on big bodies of water. That's what the boat I got is for. So I think I want to use it there. But again, as soon as you've already heard me in the boat kind of get frustrated at like, this got to unscrew this, and then now it's got to come off, and now it's got to go down, and the pin's not lubricated, and blah, 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 blah.
The farting around factor.
Like minutes that the fly's not in the water.
Yep.
I don't have patience for that. I want to fish. So I'm kind of a little bit more towards I'll use it, clearly. But yeah, hopefully you guys will fish this year. Otherwise,
I got no problem
I'll definitely
fishing in
take it
other
up.
people's boats that have it, especially buddies.
Yeah, well, there you go. I think that probably sums it up. I don't know if we came to a conclusive statement, but I think we explored it. If you're thinking about using Livescope for muskies, use it at your own peril. Your buddies might make fun of you. They also might want to get in your boat and use it with you. It's not going to work everywhere. It works some places really well. It's a lot of stuff. It shortens parts of the learning curve, but it doesn't solve the puzzle.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot going on. We're going to see how it kind of develops, but yeah. So that's pretty much it, folks. We always appreciate the support coming out, listening, or watching the Spot Burn podcast. We touched on Livescope today. We'd love to hear your thoughts about it. Are you part of the angry mob? Do you have 6 of them in your boat? Where do you land? Is it ruining fishing, or is it the reason you fish? Let us know. We want to hear about it. Like, subscribe, check out the podcast. And if you got questions about musky fly fishing or fishing in Wisconsin with a fly rod, hit us up at muskyfool.com. Until next time.
Take it easy, guys.
See ya.
Thank you for listening to the Spot Burn podcast. Coming to you from the dungeon, this podcast is presented by Musky Fool Fly Fishing Co. We want to thank our awesome sponsors, Portland Line Company and Stealth Craft Boats. We also want to thank all of you, our listeners, for tuning in, subscribing, sharing, and spreading the good word. If you haven't heard, go check us out at muskyfool.com. Have fun out there on the water, y'all.